You're listening to CX Passport, the show about creating great customer experiences with a dash of travel talk. Each episode, we'll talk with our guests about great CX, travel, and just like the best journeys, explore new directions we never anticipated. I'm your host, Rick Denton. I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport. Let's get going. Sometimes an introduction catches you off guard. I'm always on the lookout for interesting stories to share on CX Passport, which results in phenomenal opportunities to meet new people. When I met today's guest, Brian Elliott, co-founder of Wove, I stumbled onto a concept so hyper-focused on the customer, I was truly amazed. Personalization and customer experience go hand in hand these days, but would you expect to see hyper-personalization in the engagement ring design and manufacturing space? Check out this quote. Each love story deserves a truly one-of-a-kind product and a one-of-a-kind customer experience to match. That's a high bar for customer experience indeed. Prior to Wove, Brian gathered corporate, additional entrepreneurial, and West Point graduate military experience. Brian is a unique character filled with great stories stemming from those experiences. I'm looking forward to hearing more about the global experiences he had inside the U.S. Army for sure. Having been married now 22 and a half years, I am far removed from the engagement ring buying experience. I know that how I went through the experience back in the late 90s is much different than today. Brian and Wove strive to take today's experience and make it even more unique. It'll be fun to explore this with Brian today. Brian, welcome to CX Passport.
Rick, thanks for having me on.
It's gonna be a fun show here. So I think we need to just start off right at the bat. Wove was such a unique concept to me. So let's just start with you letting listeners tell them a little bit about Wove.
Yeah, happy to share, Rick. So Wove is a direct-to-consumer custom engagement ring company, but we uniquely build couples an exact replica of their ring for an at-home try-on experience. And so what we do with this at-home try-on, and I'm holding a ring up that Rick can see. He's smiling because it looks exactly like the final ring. And
it's very beautiful. Thank you, Brian. I'm happily married, but otherwise I might be tempted. Thank you for showing that to me.
Yeah, she's got you down for 22 years, so you're in for at least 22 more. But what this allows folks to do is try it on at the comfort of their home and know that this is the exact ring for them. And so we remove the uncertainty of buying online, and we match that with sort of this total certainty of an at-home try-on experience. And we remove the pressure of the in-store experience and the limited options of the in-store experience with truly unlimited design options. And so how we get at that, and I'll just walk you through the CX before we dive in further, Rick, because I know that's really what you're thinking about is we actually match our clients with a jewelry designer remotely over Zoom, just how we're talking now. They custom design a ring, approve a sketch, and then we go into that build phase of the replica before moving on to that final ring, which we also build for folks.
I think that's the part that really caught me off guard when I thought about it, because custom rings exist, right? That concept is there, but this idea of designing it in person, live, right there with the designer, and then allowing the replica to come home. That's a pretty interesting thing. I'm curious, how did you come up with that concept? How did that idea become sort of the genesis of this is how we want Wove to be?
Yeah, so it really maps back to understanding what the buyer's problems are. I had a pretty poor experience going through the engagement ring shopping process. My co-founder did as well, and then a lot of our friends going through the space really struggled. And so as we dove all the way back to what are the true problems that this customer is trying to surpass, there's really two core problems. And then once we understood those problems, we could build onto solutions that might work. But problem number one was actually a limit of options, right? And so for a typical consumer journey, you would walk into a store and you would look at the 25 options, and that's sort of your reality. And if those don't map onto what you're looking for, like you're at a kind of a standstill, which is a common point that folks get to. Sort of transition to online at that point where there's maybe 1,000 or 2,000 options inside of a store, but looking at it inside of an online store, but looking at it on a video screen and saying, yep, I'm going to spend $10,000 on this forever purchase, just doesn't really bridge the confidence gap. And so folks sort of end up taking this less than ideal, like leap of faith, overpaying for something that they're not in love with, and then they kind of feel stuck with it because they proposed with it. And so we wanted to address both of those problems. And then we sort of built a user experience that basically took both of those problems and made them assets for our customers.
I like that a lot. I'm curious though, you know, it sounds like you're describing a particularly unique, well, maybe not unique, maybe, I know when I went through the process, I had an inkling what my then girlfriend, then fiance, then spouse wanted, had an idea, we talked about it, but she was not really involved in my selection process and was very involved. You're describing something that seems a little more joined together and something that explores together. How did you know who that Wove customer would be and what they would want?
Yeah, it's so interesting. So, well over 60% of couples are actually designing rings together now.
Okay.
And so that we've seen a cultural shift. We do that through surveying, some other techniques, but really where we got the key insight that this was going on is we actually incubated a company out of the top store of a brick and mortar jewelry store, my co-founder's parents' store. And
oh,
so
nice.
what we're
okay.
able to do is actually like kind of peer over every single day and watch all these engagement ring sales proceed over time. What we noticed that was so interesting was couples would come in together, they would act kind of bashful and almost a little ashamed and say, we actually both want to be a part of this process. I want to help him figure out what the design is going to be because I want to wear it forever. And then over and over, couples would come in with the same sort of, I know we shouldn't be doing this together, but we want to. And no one actually realizes this is what everyone's doing. It's how everyone wants to shop now. And so that was one of the key insights as we mapped to, what is a unique market that this process really, really solves a problem for. And it's that couple that wants to be a part of the design process together. We call it co-creation for the modern union here.
Oh man, there's so many themes woven into what you just said there. One is this idea of not only are you, I guess, participating in a cultural shift, you're helping enable it as well. So it's not just a case of where you've identified it and you're just kind of riding away, but rather because of helping facilitate this, you're removing that embarrassment, you're removing some of the awkwardness, you're to some degree normalizing what was, certainly you're right, it's a cultural shift. I did mention when I was doing this is a lot different today than what it was before. And the second thing that I heard in there is this idea, it's almost a shame that for those that are brick and mortar, how did you learn about this? Well, you listened and observed the customer. Like just simply that, right? You sat there in a store and watched what they were doing. That's fascinating. Why do you think that wasn't happening already? Why was the voice of the customer not being heard inside the industry before?
Yeah, it's a great question. It's a very fragmented industry. And, so anytime you have hyper-fragmented industries, it usually signals some opportunity for disruption because you have tens of thousands of successful small business owners that have a good enough solution to service their local market. And really, that's good enough for them. But really what we're showing is like the market writ large has opportunity to be disrupted. And we can provide a new model that can service customers everywhere in a really unique way.
There's, what we could do is carve out those last 40 seconds, maybe it was 90 seconds. That could be the signature line of some entrepreneurial podcast. You just gave a phenomenal little nugget of wisdom there of, hey, if you are looking for a new business idea, look for that incredibly fragmented industry. You gave a little bit of your secret sauce away there. But it does make me think about the industry in general. And it could be just my own lack of awareness of the jewelry, the diamond industry, that sort of thing. But I have this perception that it does not welcome new entrants with these open arms. It's not a very welcoming and easy to enter industry. So how challenging was it to break into this space in general?
Yeah, that's another point to dovetail off what you just said. We're really looking at hyperfragmentation and then barriers to entry. And if you have those two things that exist, there's probably major opportunity area in there. And so, any market that, if a freshman at Stanford can get into the space, right, it's probably been innovated in. Jewelry is an incredibly hard market to break into. It's really, without Andrew, my co-founder's 40-year plus relationship in the industry, there's not a chance we would be able to get these relationships with these diamond site holders, get these relationships with these vendors. But in that, we were able to sort of accelerate all of the required processes to actually source and build jewelry in a way that was really compelling. And so that made the space, as I was evaluating it from an outside market perspective, so not from jewelry initially, made it all the more interesting and sort of explained, hey, this is why this hasn't been innovated in the way that we are seeing. It's really, really hard to get into. We've done that, and it is totally fragmented.
This is your captain speaking. I want to thank you for listening to CX Passport today. We've now reached our cruising altitude, so I'll turn that seatbelt sign off. While you're getting comfortable, hit that follow or subscribe button on your favorite podcast app so you'll never miss an episode. Love it if you'd tell a friend about CX Passport, leave a review so others can discover the show as well. Now, sit back and enjoy the rest of the episode.
So having the access to a barrier buster like that is certainly helpful. I still go back to that voice of the customer element of it. Was there this like a particular moment where you and your co-founder looked at each other with that aha? Is there that genesis moment of Wove where you're peering over the ledge and you hear that story? Anything in that space?
I think the couples buying together really happened, over the long duration of a time. There wasn't a single aha. We had an aha moment when we were testing out different user experiences. So we started with these problems. We sort of built a jobs to be done framework where we could service our customers. And then we began testing different ways to solve those jobs for folks, which really was different business models, right? And so there are a few different ways to solve this. And so we went out, we tested business models, we acquired customers against those business models. And then we were waiting for exactly what you described, that aha moment of, wow, like this for this customer was qualitatively 10 times better than any other solution they could provide. And there's a moment in a consultation where this woman who we just sold this engagement ring to started bawling. And we were like, oh no, like, what did we do? No. Like, you're like,
wow, we really screwed this one up.
Exactly. Like, you're like a startup, like trying to figure, you're just like this, like this might not be a comfortable problem. And then, she said, I just tried so many other ways to get what I wanted. And with you guys, it just felt so heard and so certain that this is forever. And those are powerful words after you think she's crying because you messed something up. And,
right. You've handed over the tissues. So sorry.
And so that was sort of a moment where we said, okay, this person tried many options, right? This person really had a market need. And this person was like exactly like a very typical 30-year-old persona. Like, this wasn't like a crazy unique customer. And so we knew that, we've got a really tight match for our persona. We found the right application of our user experience against that jobs to be done framework.
Gosh, that's a beautiful story. Like, I'm sitting here struggling to think of the next question. Not really, but just it makes me want to just sit and steep in that answer. The idea, especially in your space, how important emotion is. I think I want to circle back to that. But right now, I want to ask you about your West Point experience. I know it's a bit of a turn here, but I know that had to influence even how you approach customer experience in general. But with that global experience through West Point, through the U.S. Army, you've got to have some influence from the globe around how you think of customers and business in general. What does that look like? How did that West Point experience in U.S. Army drive some of that for you?
Yeah, a few things there. One, my co-founder is also a West Pointer, went to West Point together. So
that helps.
We kind of get teased from our friends because it's like, how did a couple infantry Army Rangers get into jewelry? So there's
it's not a typical path, no.
But what I would say is, the experience of living, South Asia, Middle East, Eastern Western Europe, Alabama, right? Like, different ways of viewing the world, and what that's provided me an opportunity to is just question the assumptions about how we think the world works and how we think people work, and just with every single this has to be done XYZ, like that just washes over me as like just inherently untrue. Nothing sort of has to be done a certain way, and until you see people successfully living and operating in totally different paradigms, can you approach every single moment of, oh, this is just the way it's done, and just look at that not as fact but as opportunity.
Not just customer experience, what you're describing, even starting a business or anything like that. I have often, and listeners have heard me say this on the show before, that I actually wish that everyone could travel, that everyone could experience that. I think we would find greater humanity and expressions of humanity if we would understand exactly what you just said there, Brian, and that was the way that I do it may not be the way that someone else does it, and how that influences my approach to just another human has have found itself to be grown by when I've been exposed to cultures that are not my own. Do you find that I'm specifically thinking about this massive shift and this new idea of Wove? Do you think how much do you think that your exposure to global cultures helped influence that? Did you even get into perhaps even the proposal or marriage or even kind of how family is oriented in different areas across the globe? Or was it more just recognizing, hey, this is something different?
I think we did an analytical international lens from the company from a growth perspective. So to sort of, hey, how is this trend changing in Eastern Western Europe and in Asia as well? And so we're seeing the adoption of sort of this US centric proposals globally. And so that's sort of like one piece aside. But I think really what was more important to us is just accepting the fact that this tradition of man surprises woman with rock is changing and is going to change. And I think until you are around places that inherently do things very, very differently, it's very hard to sit in your own culture and say like, oh, this is just the way, this is the way that this is going to work. It's like, no, like people do this very differently all over the world. Our own culture is changing and is reflecting a sort of a changing within our society. And then other cultures are sort of going to change, potentially parallel to them.
Brian, I want to do a little change of pace here. Thinking about the global travels, thinking of all that, I want you to join me here in the First Class Lounge. But before we even walk in the doors, I just want to sit on that answer there. I love the sentence, man surprises woman with rock. I don't think I've ever heard the proposal description so blunt like that, but you're right. It is so different across the globe. And I'm glad that you've had that opportunity to travel the globe and see those different cultures. Now, when you travel the globe, that's got to be exhausting. And I imagine the Army did not present too many opportunities to have a rest in the First Class Lounge, but today we are going to. So let's have some fun here in the First Class Lounge. What is a dream travel location from your past?
Gosh, I think Poland, which I feel like no one on the show has said. But
not a single person has said Poland.
Yeah, like places like Krakow are just incredibly beautiful and I think underrated from a tourist perspective. And so just incredible culture, incredible people, and it's incredible architecture. So and it's not full of other tourists, which I love. And so you can just go to a small city in Europe and just like have a very fulfilling experience.
Brian, you clearly zig where others zag, right? I know that's a cliche phrase, but that's probably why you've been successful as an entrepreneur. The fact that you're saying, yeah, Poland's great because no one's there, because it's beautiful, because no one else explores it. I love that. I love that as a fond dream travel location from your past. Absolutely. Now, going to the future, what's a dream travel location you've not been to yet?
Yeah, I would love to spend... Gosh, great question. I think I just love to spend some time in like the outback in Australia. I think that is just, it feels like such an adventure, and would just be like awesome outdoor activities.
There is a former guest that described it's like maybe a 10-day hike. She's Australian. A 10-day hike through the outback that is something that's kind of iconic and legendary. And it was one that I just sat there and listened to her thinking, that is a hike that I would love to go to. So yes, the outback, I can see why that would be on a dream travel location for the future. What is a favorite thing to eat?
I think, anything that my partner cooks is delicious, but she has a specialty for tacos for sure.
Oh, you've hit one of my favorites. Now, I'm talking to you from Texas, so I obviously have access to quite a few great tacos. But yes, that's the one item that when that is made at home, I go into full glutton mode. It's just like I can't stop eating them. Oh, you definitely hit this podcaster's heart with the taco answer. On the other side, what is the thing your parents forced you to eat but you hated as a kid?
That's a great question. I think I hated like just broccoli as a kid. I love it. I love it now. I'm an avid consumer. Yeah, so nothing too unique on that one.
I was weird as a kid. I actually liked broccoli as a kid, and I like it now, but there were plenty of vegetables that I could not stand. But broccoli has certainly come up as an answer to that question many times before. What is one travel item, not including your phone, you will not leave home without?
Good question. I think that's all I a toothbrush. I mean, that's it, Rick. Like toothbrush is critical, but like I really will like grab a toothbrush and a phone and a cell phone charger and just head out. I used to travel like that a lot more than I do now. But those portable toothbrushes that have the case that go with them are fit well in your pocket, and then you don't even need a backpack.
Brian, I want to circle back to something, the story that you told about the aha moment when the tears flowed. You've got a bit of a responsibility here when it comes to an experience. This is a very meaningful moment. We talk about moments that matter, but folks talk about that in a transaction with a credit card, right? You're talking about a really meaningful moment. How do you all, I guess, embrace that responsibility and understanding that this experience is more than just a nice server at a restaurant? This is a meaningful moment, not just in that transaction, but in your customers' lives. How does that responsibility weigh on the company and drive how you intend to create the experiences?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's twofold for us. One is the experience that we're able to deliver human to human, right? Matching them with a designer who's going to understand their needs and ensuring that the people that we hire into those roles are just incredibly empathetic and incredibly competent individuals. So we have an incredibly high barrier to come into that and a pretty rigorous process to move in. So that's part one of the actual experience. And then part two comes down to having the highest level of confidence in the physical product that we do deliver. And so most of our money and most of our staff is actually on the building and creation of the actual rings already here in the US. And so we have an independent shop in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, staff with master goldsmiths that ensure that we are building the highest quality, one-of-a-kind pieces that are built to last a lifetime and beyond. And in that confidence, it actually enables our salespeople and designers to be great, because they know and they can see, like, I know that Liz or Brian or Jeff and all these goldsmiths who are the best in the industry are building the product that I'm designing for this person. And so in that, there's a nice synergy of confidence. And for us, like having the most important thing we do is build this thing. Our delivery method is incredibly unique. But at the end of the day, we are building and selling a physical product that somebody's going to have in their life.
That is, I love what you said there about the designer. I was thinking of the responsibility of the emotional relationship between customer and even the designers you're describing. But there's a level of trust and the emotional layer right there between your designer and your goldsmith as well, that the designer knows I can go all in on something incredibly wild, incredibly creative, and have the confidence and trust that my goldsmith is going to be able to deliver a phenomenal product in that. And I would think, especially in this space, trust is really important. So I'm kind of curious, it sounds like you've mentioned a little bit of this, but trust, beyond that emotion, how do you make sure that customers are trusting you through this experience?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think one, the try before you buy is inherently a trust building process. So you kind of get to wear this thing and know this is what I'm going to get before you get the final thing. And so I don't really know how you'd start an engagement ring company without this, like, just like, oh, I'm going to start an e-commerce. Like, that sounds hard, right? Like,
right.
Because like, how are you going to break the first 100 sales of like, yeah, like, I know we're a new company, but just trust us.
Just trust us.
Yeah, like that seems tough. I think we do a few other things uniquely around social proof, though, that really enables the customer and the designer to feel great about the product. We have an on-site content creator in our manufacturing location. This person actually creates Instagram-ready reels of people's rings being crafted from start to finish.
Oh, nice.
And so you get this nice moment of social proof. Wow, this is actually my ring going through this process. And this is awesome for me from a trust perspective. I can look at previous customers and see their rings being truly crafted in the United States by a master goldsmith, look at their assets, and then have a nice digital asset for myself that I can have on my socials or my wedding video or what have you.
Oh, I really like that. The idea, because exactly what you're saying. It's not just, social proof. Okay, hey, you customer can watch your ring, but I guarantee they're out there sharing it. They're because it's so cool and unique. It's so different that absolutely they'd want to share that. Now, I think that we're kind of coming close to the end of time. I got another question for you that I want to understand. You've created this remote native company. from the beginning, you've been remote with your customers. And I've got to imagine that has created sort of this unique way of doing business with them. So what has that meant for customer experience that Wove delivers when it's from the very beginning, it's remote only? They can't walk into a store and see this.
Yeah, I think for our customer, they're very Zoom native. They've at least worked on Zoom for the last couple of years, but probably work in a hybrid environment at a minimum.
Right.
And so the idea of bringing their hyper personalized, tailored shopping experience into their home via Zoom is very, very normal at this point. In a way that even 5 years ago it wasn't. And so I think Zoom is just a new channel that people use to connect with as well. That people don't think about it as a channel as much, but it's just a one-to-one channel of design and ultimately connection for us. And so it really comes down to, is this a way that your target market can connect in a way that's quite comfortable and native to them? And the answer for us, for our business, is yes. And so it's not, we're meeting them where they're already used to being.
All the way back to what we talked about at the beginning, and that was listening to the customer. How did you identify this customer segment? Well, you watch them. How did you understand how they want to interact with you? Well, they're Zoom native, so they're more comfortable in this. In fact, it sounds like from what you're describing, in many cases, they're more comfortable talking to someone on Zoom than walking into a store and having this potentially deeply emotional conversation with someone there in person. You mentioned I'm cheating. I'm asking another question because I'm going back to, if it's Zoom, if it's the emotion, if it's all of those things together, the quality of the employee that you bring in. You mentioned this. How do you? This is a challenge for a lot of folks right now, just hiring in general. But you're talking about hiring some pretty significantly skilled in empathy, skilled in design, and then skilled in the craft as well. How do you go about doing that?
This all comes back to people want to work somewhere where there's a true competitive advantage to being successful. And so we have a unique selling proposition to our customers that enables a designer for the first time to provide total confidence in what they're providing to that customer. And so this is a pain point that as a jewelry designer, these individuals have felt their entire life, which is, how do I cross this chasm of, I want to design this thing to get you totally certain. And we're bridging the gap for them for a way that's feels incredible as somebody that's trying to really express and provide art for somebody. So that helps us from a recruiting perspective, bring in really talented people. And we're also one of the only places where you can sell jewelry and not have to have an in-person retail location, which comes with its own sort of stressors and constraints based on your lifestyle. And so we provide, basically probably the best remote jewelry design role in the industry that I've known.
I like that. I like that a lot. I like the idea of how are you, it's not so much how are you selecting the talent, it's how are you attracting them with this great environment in which for them to express their creativity, their skill set, and the other. You basically took my question, flipped it on its head, but that's probably what most employers should be doing, is not how do I select, but how do I attract? And I love that approach. Wove Brian, I mentioned it. It really caught me off guard. I'm intrigued by it. I'm looking forward to my children experiencing it, as I have missed that window, thankfully, happily where I am today. But I hope my children will experience something like Wove. How can people learn more about Wove? How can they get to know more about you and Wove and the experience that Wove provides?
If they go to wovemade.com, WOVEMADE.com. It's our website. We're across all the major socials at Wove_made, MADE. It's just a nod to us actually making all the things that we also build. So that's the spin on the URL there. And feel free to reach out to me on LinkedIn if you want to connect. Brian Elliott, 2 L's, 2 T's. Always happy to talk anything growth or product or customer experience. I'm always happy to jam out on.
That's awesome. I will get all of that into the show notes so that you didn't have to write that down. Just scroll down and you'll be able to find out more about Brian and find out about Wove. Brian, thank you so much for being on the show today. I learned a lot. I did not expect to hear the story, the emotional aha moment, but that was beautiful. Thank you for sharing that. And certainly thank you for sharing your insight into how you got into Wove and what the experiences are that you're creating there. I appreciate you being on the show, Brian. Thanks.
Awesome. Thanks so much, Rick.
Thanks for joining us this week on CX Passport. Make sure to visit our website, cxpassport.com, where you can hit subscribe so you'll never miss a show. While you're at it, you can check out the rest of the EX for CX website. If you're looking to get real about customer experience, EX for CX is available to help you increase revenue by starting to listen to your customers and create great experiences for every customer every time. Thanks for listening to CX Passport, and be sure to tune in for our next episode. Until next time, I'm Rick Denton, and I believe the best meals are served outside and require a passport.